Okay, welcome to our first lesson of the human body. So by now you should have grabbed your first notes package from the front table entitled The Human Body. So Unit D is the unit that most students really enjoy because it entails talking about our body and how it works. So today we are going to introduce the digestive system. So what I encourage you to do for this first page is spend a bit of time just writing down things that you know about each of these body systems. Each of these body systems we're going to go into detail about over the next maybe 2.5 months-ish. So we will cover everything starting from the digestive system to the respiratory system. So digestive system, we're going to be talking about. Feel free to write down what you want to take from what I am mentioning. Um, the digestive system, we're going to talk about how we are taking in our food, how we are breaking down the food, and how the food is being absorbed into our body. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different enzymes and how enzymes are functioning, how enzymes are being produced by our body, where are they produced, where are they going, and what are they doing. A lot of the digestive system, I will be frank and honest, not a lot of students like the digestive system because there are so many different enzymes that you have to know, and you need to know what they do, how they do it, and when they do it. So we do have to get through the digestive system. Now, with regards to the digestive system, we know we need to consume the food, and then the food needs to be absorbed. Now, you may have in grade 8 talked about the digestive system briefly, um, about how you are breaking down food. Now, breaking down the food, we allow the food to move through our digestive system, starting at our mouth, down to our esophagus, down into our stomach, and then into our small intestine. The small intestine is the major organ and the most important organ that is allowing the absorption of the nutrients. Now, where the heck do these nutrients go? They have to go somewhere. So what this means is we need to be able to, by the end of the unit, connect all of our body systems together because they need to function together in order to have optimal functioning of our entire body. So the digestive system is going to be linked to the respiratory system. The respiratory system is talking about our lungs and how we're taking in oxygen and getting rid of carbon dioxide. We can very much relate the respiratory system to cellular respiration because we know in cellular respiration that we're creating carbon dioxide and we are taking in oxygen. We're technically taking the glucose as well, which is coming from our digestive system so that we can do cellular respiration to create the ATP we need in order to function. So respiratory system is supplying that oxygen for cellular respiration. The digestive system is supplying the glucose for cellular respiration. And then this leads us to the circulatory system. Circulatory system is our transport system in our body. So this entails things like your heart, your blood vessels, okay? So your arteries, your veins, your capillaries. This is what is transporting the oxygen, the glucose, the carbon dioxide in and out of the body. This is a very important organ system, and this is the one that we are really going to connect the first two to the last three. The motor system we're going to briefly touch on. You may have in maybe AD or gym class might have talked about the motor system or the muscular system. So it's talking about the different muscle groups and how they function. We don't go into a lot of detail about it. We talk about how the muscle works and how it requires ATP and how the muscle fibers are actually contracting, but we don't need to know and memorize each of the muscle groups in our body. We just need to know how they work because all of our other body systems require the movement of the different muscles found within our body. The immune system is our next one. So this is our defense system. This sometimes works and sometimes does not work and it makes us sick. So the immune system is our fighting system. So this is talking about our white blood cells, also known as our leukocytes. These guys are the ones that are very important in helping maintain a healthy body. So we'll talk about how the white blood cell is fighting infection. We're going to talk about the first line of defense, second line of defense, and third line of defense. Here we'll also talk about what red blood cells do, which will kind of tie back to our respiratory system and link it to all of our other body systems as well. The last one that we're going to touch on is our excretory system. This is also not a fan favorite. The excretory system is talking about the excretion of waste. Now, we excrete waste multiple ways throughout our body. So typically when you hear excretion, you think about getting rid of, coming out of our body. So students typically think that we're talking about pee, urinating, as well as making a bowel movement or pooping. So excretory system is only entailing the urinating part. Okay, when we talk about the bowel movements, that actually relates to the digestive system, because in the digestive system, you connect the small intestine to the large intestine, which goes to the rectum and then out the anus. Okay, so that we'll talk about a bowel movement in the digestive system. So that's a brief overview of everything we're going to cover over the next couple months. Now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the digestive system. We're not actually deep diving into how the digestive system works until we talk about what are the nutrients our body requires in order to function. So this is going to be really hard to highlight. So I'll talk about things that need to be highlighted. I'll try to underline. I'll do my best to highlight for you guys. So moving into our first section of notes of the digestive system, it really talks about what are the essential nutrients for life. So the three big macromolecules. So the term macromolecule is an important term because macro means large. So we need these macromolecules in large amounts. In comparison to micromolecules, micromolecules are things that we require, or micronutrients are needed in small quantities. So things like vitamins, okay? Macromolecules are three big groupings, are carbohydrates, lipids, and then proteins. You may have talked about these three groupings in other science courses, but carbohydrates are our primary energy source of a cell. If you think back to, so I'll be doing a lot of side talking and trying to connect it back to cellular respiration. So if you want to jot anything down to the side right now, would probably be beneficial to do so. So when we talk about carbohydrates, one of the primary sources of energy for our cells, for cellular respiration, is a carb. Okay, glucose, which is the main reactant of cellular respiration, is a carbohydrate. Okay, and carbohydrates are coming from mainly our plants, which is why it's saying here it's a structural material of plant cell walls, because, well, when we eat our plants, we're consuming these carbohydrates. So I encourage you at this point to list out some examples of things that you know to be a carbohydrate. So some of the most common ones that students are going to point out at this point are going to be things like potatoes, okay, rice, bread. All of these are the carbs, the yummy ones that we like when we're angry and we really want some yummy food. At least that's how it is for me. But these are not our only carbohydrates. The other carbohydrates that we look at are other vegetables and fruits. So veggies and fruits are also examples of carbohydrates. So carrots, okay, broccoli, apples, all of these are carbohydrates as well. So moving on to our lipids. lipids are energy storage compounds. So once our body has enough carbohydrates and has enough to do cellular respiration, enough cellular respiration to create the ATP that we need for everyday life, then our body is going to store excess sugar. Actually, sorry, it's going to store excess sugar as glycogen, which I'm going to get to, not a lipid. Lipids are actually our second energy source of our body. So our body is typically going to use our carbs first, and then it's going to move on to lipids and then to proteins. So our body will use it in that order, which is why you see these lovely 1, 2, 3s down at the bottom of the chart. So lipids are energy storage compounds, also a structural component of cell membranes. So if you think back to grade 10 science, in grade 10 science, you talked about what the cell membrane is actually composed of. A cell membrane actually has carbs, lipids, and proteins in it. Okay, so the structural membrane, the membrane is mainly composed of phospholipids. Phospholipids are those little structures here. I'll see if I can pull one up for you. So I'm going to type in a phospholipid bilayer. So when we look at our phospholipid bilayer, this is representing the cell membrane. So this is what you've seen in previous science courses. So you have all of these little orange or red little structures that have a head and then 2 tails on it. Those are representing our phospholipids. That makes up the majority of our cell. So this is why it's important to consume some lipids or some fats, because our body consumes them, and the majority of our cell membrane is made up of lipids, and we're constantly making new cells. These blue structures that you see here are proteins. Okay, proteins are doorways to allow things in and out of the cell. And then we have carbohydrates, which I don't see in this picture. Okay, maybe it's in this one. So here's a glycoprotein. So glycoprotein is talking about a glucose compound, okay, which is a carbohydrate attached to a protein. Okay, so here we have a glycoprotein, so glucose and a protein molecule attached together, and that acts as a marker. So you do need all of these nutrients in order for everyday function, because it's what makes up your body. You're made up of millions of cells. So what are some examples of our lovely lipids? So think about some fats that you consume. So typically students would start with things like butter, margarine, lard. And then we would pause for dramatic effect. Where else can we get some good oils? So nowadays we can get oils from things like avocado. I always spell avocado wrong. Avocado. So avocados, good source of healthy fat. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be in an oil form. It can be the actual avocado. Okay, you can get some lipids, some fats from meats. Okay, ground beef has some fat in it. So when we look at a food source, it's not necessarily only under the category of lipid or carbohydrate or protein. It can be classified as many of the groupings. So a meat can have some fat in it, but it is also a protein. So it can act as both a lipid and a protein, which then leads us to our proteins. Okay, so proteins again, biggest one, meats. Okay, where else can you get proteins? Nuts. Okay, you can get them in some veggies. Okay, so you can list more if you so wish. We're going to move on at this point. So I've broken down our notes into the details of carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. So our first macromolecule that we're going to focus on is the one that our body wants to use as priority, which is your carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are molecules that are composed of sugar subunits. Okay, so this is important. Sugar subunits. They contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. So that means for every 1 carbon, we have 2 hydrogens to 1 oxygen. So if we think about it, our glucose molecule was C6H12O6. It's going to be too hard for me to get those into a subscript, so just note that your numbers should be in subscript. Okay, so your 6, your 12, or sorry, your 6, your 12, and your 6 should be subscript. So if I reduce those, I get a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Okay, sucrose is another example. Okay, sucrose, fructose is another sugar, and we'll talk about some of those examples a little bit later on. So now it's asking you, what is the product of the process occurring here? So if I look at the picture, I can see that it kind of looks like a person's running. So what is the product of the process occurring here? So what process is happening here? So the person is running. So if a person is running, what products are they going to be producing more of? So we should be able to, at this point, be able to tie the fact that a person is running to the process of cellular respiration. So since we are thinking about cellular respiration, we should know that our products of cellular respiration are carbon dioxide and water. Now, if we remember back to cellular respiration, the water is generated because we have the final electron acceptor being oxygen, which combines with the hydrogen to make water, which if you're running, you'll be producing a lot of water. Okay, you'll be sweating a lot. The CO2 is going to be exhaled. And if we remember back, the majority of the carbon dioxide that is given off and produced is from the Krebs cycle, as well as the pyruvate oxidation phase. And remember, you can pause the video and you can fill in notes as you need to. Make this a bigger size to make it easier for you to read. So postulate why a marathon runner might eat a lot of carbohydrates before a run. So this we have to think about. So we're hypothesizing. Postulate means come up with an answer or come up with a reason why, an educated guess. So thinking back to cellular respiration, in cellular respiration, we know that we do get the products of carbon dioxide and water, but our reactants that we need are glucose and oxygen. So why would a person eat a lot of carbohydrates before a run? What is a person going to do you think, with all of that extra glucose if they are eating a lot of carbs? So pasta, meal, bacon, pasta, breads, those kinds of things. So what a marathon runner will do is they will store excess carbohydrates as glycogen, which is a storage molecule of glucose, so that they have access to enough sugar during their run to create enough ATP to do to run and run and run. So what the body is going to do is it's going to take all of those extra carbohydrates and store it as glycogen. When the body is needing more glucose, in the case of a marathon runner, they are going to take that extra glycogen and convert it back into glucose so that the body has enough glucose to create and go through cellular respiration to create enough ATP, which is energy, so that the body can actually run for long periods of time. So basically, they're storing all of the energy that they might need for that marathon. And then it says here, what is the main role of carbohydrates in the body? Well, we know it to be the main source of energy for cellular respiration. Everything is going to be tying back to cellular respiration. Carbohydrates are a must. That sugar is representing a carbohydrate. So, what are some examples of carbohydrates? So there are three major categories to carbohydrate molecules. So our first one are referred to as monosaccharides. Okay, well, I was trying to highlight that. So mono, the word mono is implying one. Saccharide means sugar. So if I were you, I would put a little note to myself. Mono means one, saccharide is representing sugar. So anytime I see a monosaccharide, I am referring to a compound that is a single sugar unit. Okay, one sugar unit. So the examples of monosaccharides, and I will only ever ask you to know these three, okay, are glucose, which you already know. That is that easiest sugar unit or carbohydrate that our body breaks down in cellular respiration. And so you have glucose, galactose, and fructose. These are all monosaccharides, which all have the chemical formula C6H12O6. Okay, so they all have that same molecular formula, but they are isomers of each other. So what you see in this picture here at the bottom is we have glucose is our first, this is our first structural diagram. Galactose is this structure, and then fructose is this last one. So an isomer is representing a molecule that has the same chemical formula, but structurally the atoms are arranged differently. So chemicals that have the same chemical formula but have different structural diagrams. So glucose, galactose, and fructose all have 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. But how they are arranged in their structural formula is different. So you can see in your glucose and your galactose, simply your OH is on the opposite side of the formula, or on the opposite side of the diagram. Here you see that your fructose is quite different in comparison to your glucose and your galactose. I'm not expecting you to memorize what these structures look like. I am only asking you to know that you have glucose, galactose, and fructose as monosaccharides, and they are isomers of each other. So they look different, but they have the same chemical formula. So knowing what a monosaccharide is, you should be able to define what a disaccharide is. So a disaccharide is going to represent a 2 sugar unit molecule. So 2 sugar unit molecule, or carbohydrate, I should say, to be more specific. Okay, and I should add 2 sugar unit carbohydrate. Okay, so the examples that you need to know for disaccharides, and the only 3 that I will ask you, I will only ever ask you to know 3 of them. We have sucrose, maltose, and lactose. You do need to know what they're composed of. So a sucrose molecule is representing common table sugar. So this is the sugar that you find on the table that you buy at the grocery store. So sucrose is a combination of a fructose molecule and a glucose molecule. So it's going to take this glucose molecule and it's going to be added to this fructose molecule, making a bigger component or a bigger molecule. So you're going to have double the amount of carbons, double the amount of hydrogens, etc. You are going to be missing 1 oxygen, but you don't need to know that. In the case of maltose, maltose is when you have 2 glucose molecules joined together, and then lactose is representing milk sugar. So this is the sugar found within milk. This is a combination of glucose and galactose. If you look carefully, you can see that glucose is the main component in all of your disaccharides. So when you're studying, study the fact that glucose is in everything. Not technically, but here are the ones you need to know. All have glucose, and then notice the differences. So sucrose is going to have a fructose component, and then lactose is going to have a galactose component. Has the name lactose in it, so you should know that galactose is in lactose. Our last type of monosaccharide is a polysaccharide. So a polysaccharide, if I know a disaccharide is a 2 sugar unit, then a polysaccharide is going to be more than 2 sugar units in a carbohydrate. So a carbohydrate that consists of more than 2 sugar units, so 3 and more. So our first one is starch. So starch is a plant carbohydrate that is used to store energy. We know starch was actually part of our our photosynthesis unit when we talked about the Calvin cycle. And in the Calvin cycle, if the plant took those 2 P-gals and formed glucose, it could also create the storage unit of starch, or it could create that long-term storage of cellulose. So starch is one of the products that is produced by photosynthesis, more specifically in the dark reaction. So this is what we want to consume. So potatoes have a lot of starch. Okay, so starch. The next one is glycogen. Glycogen is what I mentioned earlier when it came to sugar being stored. So glycogen is an animal carbohydrate that's used to store energy. So again, if we have glucose, glucose is used immediately. So over here it says glucose versus glycogen. Glucose used immediately. Glycogen is glucose, I'll say stored glucose. Okay, so it gets converted to this storage unit, okay? And then I'm going to put brackets, when body has enough glucose. And then when your body needs more glucose and it's not eating a meal, then it'll take the glycogen that it has stored and converts it back to glucose. You'll talk more about this in detail in Bio 30, how glycogen and glucose are being converted back and forth by some hormones that are being released by different glands in our body. Cellulose, on the other hand, is a plant polysaccharide that makes up many of the plant cell walls. Okay, it's a structural component. It keeps it nice and strong. So this was that long-term storage for a plant cell as well. So what do you notice about the ending of most, not all, but most endings of carbohydrates? We have cellulose. Glycogen doesn't fit into the category, unfortunately. Glucose, galactose, fructose, sucrose, maltose. I think you're getting the point now. So the ending of each carbohydrate typically ends in OSE. So the OSE is actually telling us that it is a carbohydrate. So anytime you see something that's OSE, just know that that's representing your carbohydrates. Sorry. So how are carbohydrates made? So there are two processes happening in the body. We have dehydration synthesis and we have hydrolysis. So dehydration synthesis, when you think about dehydration, taking away water. Okay, dehydrated means you don't have enough water. That's exactly what's happening here. So in dehydration synthesis, what's happening is you're taking you're making, sorry, larger molecules by removing water. So you're going to take two things and you're going to join them together by removing the water. So if you see here, you have an H on this side and an OH on this side. If you get rid of those two things, then they combine together to make water. And now this left-handed compound and this right-handed compound have a bond that's missing. That means that that's unstable. So the remaining components here and the remaining components here are going to join together to create a stable molecule, which is a bigger molecule. Typically, this reaction doesn't happen near as much as the hydrolysis reaction. So the hydrolysis reaction is when you add water to split molecules. Okay, so technically what you're doing here is you're trying to make a smaller molecule. So by adding water, you're able to split this compound in half, which then means that the compound is missing a bond on the one side as well as the other. So the left side is missing a bond and the right side is missing a bond. So they're going to use the bonds available in water to satisfy the instability to make it more stable. So the water is going to split into the H and the OH to create two stable molecules. Now, when would this actually happen? Well, if we think about the food that we eat are composed of monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. So think about this. I'm going to go back to this starch one. Okay, so yummy, yummy potatoes made up of a lot of these. Well, everything is built up of smaller molecules. Smaller molecules, when you join them together, make bigger molecules. So technically, this starch was originally in photosynthesis made from glucose and it was converted into starch because it was stored. So technically, these are small glucose molecules just bunched together. So our body doesn't actually need starch, doesn't want starch, but it wants the glucose in the starch. So what our body's going to want to do is it's going to want to take this starch molecule and break it down into smaller molecules, which is done by hydrolysis, which is done by adding water, which is why it's important for us to drink water. Okay, because we need water to do this process to break down our food. Okay, so our thought-provoking question. Explain which type of carbohydrate would provide the body with the least amount of energy. So what I want you to do is I want you to research this one, and then tomorrow we will review this at the beginning of class. If I forget, please remind me because I will be coming off of really bad jet lag. Okay, so remind me tomorrow after you do your research on that one. Second energy molecule or second macromolecule is a lipid. So a lipid is a group of organic compounds that are greasy to touch, which is why they're called fats. So if you think back to Science 10, explain how lipids are part of the cell membrane. So if we go back to our picture, I hope I still have it up. No, I do not. I'm going to pause it and find it again. Okay, so I went and found the picture quickly here. So I roughly put in the, just a very simplistic version of what our phospholipid bilayer looked like in grade 10. So I do just a rough sketch in your notes package representing this. It does not have to look beautiful. All I want you to show is that you have proteins existing within your cell membrane, and then you have these lovely little phospholipids, which are these pinkish looking structures with two tails. Okay, you have other proteins that don't span the entire phospholipid bilayer. Cholesterol is providing fluidity to your cell membrane, etc. So lipids make up the majority of our cell membrane. So phospholipids make up the majority and they are arranged in a phospholipid, I can't spell, bilayer. So that means two lipids joined together. The tails are technically hydrophobic, which is why they're arranged toward each other. The heads are hydrophilic. They love water, which makes sense because inside of our cell and outside of our cell is majority of water because we are, as humans, roughly 70-ish% water. So you want the tails that don't like water arranged toward one another. So what role does the lipid have in the body? So this is our second energy source. Once our body consumes carbs, it will move on to lipids. Okay, and that's what you want, a very well balanced diet, because this is what allows us to feel full longer, by having that well balanced diet. Okay, if you just eat very simple carbohydrates, your body will consume that very quickly and you will feel very hungry very quickly. So moving on to our next question. It says here, is a lipid molecule polar or non-polar? So I answered this one at the top, so you should be able to answer this one. So pause your video and fill that part in, or go back and try to answer this one. So this is one I expect you to answer on your own. And then moving down, lipids consist of a glycerol component and 3 fatty acids. And so this is actually what we call a triglyceride. Triglycerides, sorry, are very common lipid molecules. So this is our backbone to our triglyceride. So this is glycerol, and then each glycerol, or each part of our glycerol molecule, is attached to one fatty acid. So each of the OH groups, which are technically your alcohol groups, or your hydroxyl groups, which you'll learn if you're going into Chem 30, will combine with a component on your fatty acid, and it will create a bond. So if you look at this reaction, it says that water is leaving. So if water is leaving, what kind of reaction is that? So if we go back here, water leaving. Water leaving the reaction is representing a, pause for dramatic effect, dehydration synthesis reaction. Okay, so you're making a bigger molecule from two or more smaller molecules. So this represents dehydration synthesis. How does the structure of a lipid differ from that of a carbohydrate? What do you notice about the structure? Okay, I want you to pause the video and answer this question, and tomorrow we will come back and go through this one as well. So remind me to go through the green dot ones. Okay. The examples of our lipids, we have triglycerides, which is that glycerol with 3 fatty acids. So triglycerides can be composed of or can be subdivided into fats and oils. Fats are lipids that are composed of glycerol and a saturated fatty acid. Now, a saturated fatty acid is an example of this diagram that you see below here. This is a very straight chain. So this is a solid at room temperature. Now, why does it become a solid at room temperature? If you look at this straight chain, imagine it as I don't know, a chair. Okay, this is a very straight chair or a very straight piece of paper. If I take this one piece of paper, I could very easily stack it on top of one another. So this is going to allow little space between the molecules because the molecule is so straight that it's easily stackable. So if it's easily stackable, it compresses very easily. By compressing very easily, you create very little space between the molecules, making it a solid at room temperature. Now, again, you can jot this down to the side if you so wish. Whereas oils, on the other hand, oils are liquid at room temperature. We know this. Okay, so oils versus fats. Fats are solid at room temperature. So bacon grease, okay, at room temperature, not when it's been cooked, but at room temperature, it hardens on the pan. So you want to clean it right away. But oils are consisting of unsaturated fatty acids. In an unsaturated fatty acid, wherever you have this double bond, it actually creates a bend in the molecule. Now, the reason it creates a bend in the molecule is because your electrons are this is more chemistry related, but if you just want to know from bio, anytime you see a double bond, it creates a bend. But it's because the electrons are pushing against one another. They have a repelling nature, so they want to bend away from each other. So now you have a bend here, and a bend here. That's going to be really hard to stack on top of one another, creating space between the molecules, which means it's going to be a liquid at room temperature. So it says, explain the difference between the saturated and the unsaturated fats. Okay, so now we're kind of summarizing what we were just saying. Saturated fats have less room between molecules as they are very straight, which makes the molecules able to stack close together, equaling solid. Unsaturated fats have more room between between molecules because there are bends in the structure created at the double bond. This allows, or this prevents the molecule from compressing as easily, and I'm going to put in brackets, less stackable, meaning that there is space between the molecules. And this equals a liquid. Our next type of lipid is a phospholipid, and this one I'm going to go through very quick. Phospholipids have been talked about, so the phospholipids make up our cell membrane. So it has the phosphate molecule. Phosphate molecule is the head of the phospholipid with the glycerol backbone, which makes up the majority of the cell membrane. So we have our hydrophobic end and our hydrophilic end. Two of these phospholipids will join together so that the tails that hate water are away from water. Waxes, on the other hand, are long-chained lipids that are insoluble in water. We're typically not going to eat wax, so we worry more about our phospholipids and our saturated and our unsaturated fats. Okay, I want you to research here the term. Oh, I'm getting rid of dots here. Amphil, I can't even say the word. Amphipathic, I guess, and explain how it relates to lipids. So again, remind me tomorrow and we'll go and summarize that. Okay, so lipid drug delivery system. So lipids can assemble themselves in a double layer sphere approximately the size of a cell. So this means that we have this lipid structure, this structure that is composed of multiple lipids. Okay, many lipids. How might this be beneficial to drug delivery? Okay, so this question I know I asked in grade 10 or I summarized in grade 10. So lipids, since they don't like water, they're always going to arrange themselves in this spherical looking structure. Okay, so two lipids are going to arrange their backbone or the tails toward one another, and they will arrange themselves in this circular structure. So this means you can deliver water-soluble meds in the aqueous liquid center of the liposome, the arrangement of the lipids. You can deliver fat-soluble meds in the phospholipid bilayer. So you can take and put water-soluble meds here in the center, and in this brown section, you can put fat-soluble medication. Your body is going to think that this liposome is self. It looks like self because the majority of your cell membrane is made up of phospholipids. So it looks like it's just another cell. So it's going to accept the liposome into itself. So basically it's going to say, come on in, welcome. So you're delivering medication right to the cell. So since the liposome is mainly made of lipids, our body will recognize as self, and drugs can be delivered, medication, delivered directly to the cell. And our last but not least energy form or macromolecule is a protein. Okay, so proteins are chains of amino acids. Chains of amino acids, you'll talk about more in detail in Bio 30 because you talk about how amino acids are created from your DNA and how that DNA gives instructions for everything in our body. So proteins are chains of amino acids, and it has a nitrogen component to it to form the structural parts of cells, or can act as antibiotics, well, antibodies too, and enzymes. The amino acids are going to vary. There are a few amino acids in our body, and they will vary according to their R group. So the R group is representing this green one down here that you see at the bottom. So your amino acid, this blue part, the amino group, is always going to be the same no matter what the amino acid is. It's always going to have a hydrogen here, and it's always going to have this carboxyl group. The only difference is this R group. So it means the rest of the compound, the rest of the amino acids. So the interactions between these R groups can cause changes to the shapes of the protein. So when you have one amino acid interacting with another amino acid, it changes the shape of a protein. And proteins are instructions for our body. Okay, so how one protein acts is going to be very different than what another protein is doing or acting like. So it could be an instruction. This protein is created to open the doors to allow sugar to come into the cell. And if this amino acid doesn't interact with this amino acid, then sugar can't get into the cell, which means no cellular respiration, which means your cells will die. So the human body can synthesize 11 out of the 20 amino acids. So basically it's saying we can make that ourselves, but we must obtain the other 9 from known essential amino acids from our diet. So we do have to get some of our amino acids from what we're consuming. Okay, so those are known as essential amino acids. A polypeptide is representing 3 or more amino acids joined together. And then it says, explain the roles of the protein in the body. Well, what we know of protein so far from grade 10 is that proteins are found in the cell membrane that act as doorways to let things in and out of the cell. So there's integral proteins and there's peripheral proteins found within the cell membrane. The integral proteins are the ones that are acting as doorways, and peripheral proteins are acting to pass on messages. Okay, so found on cell membranes to act as doorways to let things in and out of the cell, also used to identify self versus foreign. So those peripheral proteins, those proteins that are found on the outside of the cell, can act as kind of like a messaging system, recognizing that, yes, this is part of me, or no, this is not part of me. Do I need to activate my immune system? Do I need to relax? Do I need to let this message in? Okay. So I realized that that video was super long, and you probably don't like me right now, but that's okay. We will try to summarize some of this tomorrow, and remember to remind me to talk about all of those green dots. You need to make sure you research the green dots. We are going to move on tomorrow to our next lesson. We are going to be doing a macromolecule lab at some point, probably next week, or maybe later this week. Signing off.